My new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. About what he could do on his own. Impeachment by Cass Sunstein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Duck, 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 duck. Oh, there's ducks all over the beach. Oh, we're on the air? Hi. Happy Friday, first of all. TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. The hearings this morning where Louis DeJoy was, I was going to say being grilled, but it was more like he was being slathered in olive oil, hopefully in preparation for being grilled on Monday, were astonishing to me, setting aside streams of obscenities and things like that. In particular, because nobody talked about the elephant in the room. Maybe I missed it. There were parts of the hearings that I missed. Probably not more than 10 minutes of it, but thereabouts. But I didn't hear a single senator say, is this part of a plan to privatize and sell off the post office? I didn't hear a single senator say that. And then Rand Paul comes along and says words to the effect of, Postmaster General DeJoy, if you were a venture capitalist, what do you need us to do in the Senate so that you could privatize the post office? And DeJoy was like, oh, thank you very much for that question. Yes, there's a lot we could. I mean, this is what's going on here. This is not, what's becoming very, very obvious. And I was just, frankly, horrified that not a single Democratic senator got it or talked about it this morning. And again, if I missed it, please correct me. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be taking your calls for this hour. Next hour, second hour of our program today, Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be with us. He represents Silicon Valley. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's a guy that many people are saying should be seriously considered to replace Kamala Harris as California's senator. And he is, I believe, I'm pretty sure, but trust but verify, right? I believe that he is on the committee that on Monday is going to be grilling the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. And then our third hour is Anything Goes Friday. We'll be taking your calls again as well. We may have a guest in here and there, but I so far no plans other than Congressman Khanna. But the thing that made me crazy, and I kept yelling at the TV, was, ask him if he's trying to privatize the post office. And then the other thing, the other question that I kept yelling at the TV was, I thought that the questioning should go like this. If I was a United States Senator and I was questioning the Postmaster General, I would say, General DeJoy, let me think about how to phrase this. The Department of Education lost $63 billion last year. How do we get the Department of Education to start running like a business and make a profit? How do we get the Defense Department to start running like a business and make a profit? How do we get the EPA to start running like a business and make a profit? How do we get the Social Security Administration to start running like a business and make a profit? Actually, the Social Security Administration does. They've got a trust fund, but it's not being run like a business, thank God. Because businesses, in order to run something like a business, you've got to be able to skim profit off the top. You've got to be able to skim money into the pockets of the shareholders. That's the whole point of a business. And I was just boggled by the fact that nobody pointed this out. Sir, which government agencies are run like a business? Which government agencies are even asked to break friggin' even? Please identify one federal agency that has to break even every year, or that has to show a profit, that's designed to show a profit. It's crazy. I mean, the simple reality here is that these guys have been trying to privatize the post office since the Reagan administration. And in 2006, as a result of millions of dollars in bribes, explicitly, specifically, from the American Bankers Association and Citigroup, Congress, in that legislation that mandated that the post office set aside $6.5 billion a year for people who haven't even been born yet for their retirement health care benefits, the Republicans in Congress in 2006 also explicitly outlawed the post office from offering any services beyond what they offer right now. And in fact, in their lobbying, the American Banking Association, they said, quote, "Our members remain very concerned about allowing the Postal Service to offer non-postal products, including banking services. So let's set up the post office to fail. And then let's stand around and go, oh, look at it, failed. I guess we need to give it to, Charles Koch? No, Citibank? No. Oh, I know. Louis DeJoy's company. His billionaire Louis DeJoy. Let's just give the Postal Service to his company. After all, he's putting up with all this crap from Democratic senators. I mean, they're all acting like they think that all of a sudden Donald Trump last month or 3 months ago or thereabouts decided we're going to screw with the post office to screw up the elections. No, what's been going on is since 2006, since the George W. Bush administration, Republicans have been working to privatize the post office in order to set it up for privatization, just like they did, by the way, with KP service and a whole spectrum of military services in Iraq and Afghanistan. Pick your poison, right? This is just like they did with private prisons. Oh, let's break them. Let's make them fail. Let's underfund them. And then let's say, we really need to privatize this. We need the efficiencies of the free market. This is nuts. The Postal Service is not a business. Let's be very clear about this. It's part of the infrastructure of this nation that was established by the Constitution that was written in Philadelphia in 1787. In the room was America's first Postmaster General. He had held that job for a whole year in 1787 when he sat in on the Constitutional Convention to write the Constitution, Ben Franklin. Oh, but let's just take the thing apart. Take out the sorting machines, turn them into scrap. Pitney Bowes and the U.S. Postal Service were major lobbyists for that 2005 piece of legislation. 2006 is when it passed. This is just so wrong. And, what's happening? What's the result of this? And by the way, you can call on any topic you want. As I said, it's Anything Goes Friday, but I just have to get this out of my system. Steve Mnuchin, this piece in the New York Times today by Nicholas Fandos, Alan Rappaport, Ken Vogel, and Katie Edmondson. Former postal governor tells Congress Mnuchin politicized the Postal Service. So they were already in the process of destroying the Postal Service, and had been since 2006, in order to set it up for privatization. And then Trump comes along and goes, hey, we got the Postal Service limping. So let's point to that and say, how can you trust this dysfunctional Postal Service to handle your ballots? That's essentially what he's saying. And we're going to withhold any extra money from them because, hey, they're losing money. So that we can't have vote by mail. So Trump was just, jumping on the bandwagon. And as I said, I don't think a single senator mentioned a word about that. 4,800 chicks shipped to Maine farmers through the U.S. Postal Service have arrived dead in the recent weeks. Pauline Henderson, who owns Pine Tree Poultry in New Sharon, Maine, told the newspaper she was shocked last fall when all of the 800 chicks sent to her from a hatchery in Pennsylvania were dead. Usually they arrive every 3 weeks like clockwork, she said. Out of 100 birds, typically you have 1 or 2 that die in shipping. Now they're all dead.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I retweeted a post from a reporter earlier in California showing, dead animals all over the post office and dead and rotting food in California. And welcome back. Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Cliff, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Fred. There's more
how you
pressing
doing, Cliff?
issues. Okay, Tom. There's more pressing issues that we're dealing with, but this is really long overdue. Tom, you and I live in western states with legal recreational cannabis, and I personally appreciate it. I'm sure you do. But the folks in Louisiana, Missouri, yeah, of course. The folks in Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, and I'm sure there's others, those states back there, there's people still going to prison for possession of small amounts of pot. We need a federal policy of decriminalization at the very least, and we need to get cannabis off Schedule 1. Do you think, this goes back to Nixon, so do you think that this administration will be capable or be willing to get this done. You know, the federal government has that patent on some cannabinoids, right? They know there's medical purposes. So, what do you think?
Yeah, this goes back way before Nixon. It was in 1918, 1919 that Reefer Madness movie came out. I think it was in the 1920s. It might have been in the 30s that pot was put on Schedule 1. And it's been there ever since. And I'm with you, Cliff. Okay. I think it needs to be removed. We've got a dispensary just down the street from us, and they're having, they're all over the country. Legal dispensaries are having problems dealing with federally chartered banks. Some of them are figuring out ways around it, but this is a remnant not just of Nixon's war on drugs, but of Harry Anslinger's war on drugs.
Anslinger, right?
Back in our great grandparents' generation, and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And I would add, the stuff that was added to Schedule 1 in the '60s and the '70s. And again, I don't know which administration was responsible for this. Nixon wouldn't surprise me, but I also would not be surprised if it had happened during Kennedy or Johnson's administration. Were psychedelics, LSD and psilocybin and mescaline. And these are compounds that have significant therapeutic value. They're being used right now clinically to treat depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and suicidal ideation. They are very successful for these things. They're used by several of these drugs, mescaline and psilocybin specifically, are used by Native Americans in religious ceremonies. And the rest of them would, there's a lot of pagans out there, a lot of people who practice religions that have to do with honoring the earth and all life, who would like to use these ethnogens, these plant-based substances that alter our consciousness, that human beings have been using forever. I mean, they found 7,000-year-old marijuana residue a couple of months ago in some pots that were dug up in Israel. From 7,000-year-old cities, I mean, it's like we've been using pot, we've been using drugs, we alter our consciousness. By the way, we're not the only animals that do this. Elephants seek out, rotted fruit so that they can get drunk. Cats look for catnip. Cows look for Jimson weed, which has a compound in it that's poisonous to humans, but, makes cows hallucinate. I mean, this is something, experiencing the extraordinary through ethnogens is something that is common to all animals, to all mammals. So anyhow, we'll be back. We'll pick up your calls here on Anything Goes Friday in the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Exposing the con in conservative. Right after this. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. One other quick thing I wanted to draw to your attention, and then I'll just turn the show basically over to your calls. Julia Ainsley and Jacob Soboroff reporting for NBC News yesterday that as many as 25,000 children have been, to use the words of the United Nations, tortured children. This is particularly bizarre given that the whole QAnon conspiracy theory is that there's a bunch of Democrats out there who are, drinking the blood of children, and in Comet Pizza in Washington, D.C. and stuff like that. The Trump administration intentionally separated as many as 25,000 children from their parents. And it turns out, or they wanted to separate 25,000. They did separate 5,500. Let me just correct my numbers here. And the spread between those two numbers came down to a vote, basically. And Stephen Miller, in the White House, in a cabinet meeting, he's not a member of the cabinet. He's just, Donald Trump's racist speechwriter. But Stephen Miller demanded that the cabinet members vote on whether to separate children from their parents, to steal children from their parents. Well over 1,000 of these children are lost, presumably sold into child trafficking. Over 1,000 children completely lost. All of these children, these 5,500 children, are going to suffer for the rest of their lives from the scars of being torn away from their parents. Thousands of them who aren't lost are still in the system. And Stephen Miller wanted it to be 25,000 or more. And Kirstjen Nielsen said, she didn't say, oh, this is immoral. She didn't say, I don't want to be part of destroying these children's lives and their parents. She didn't express any moral concern or any humanitarian concern whatsoever. What she said was, we don't have the logistics to do this. We don't have enough officers to do this. And sure enough, she was right. And that's why there's all these children lost and missing who may have been sold into human trafficking by this administration. This is absolutely mind-boggling. 11 of the top officials raised their hands, said, yes, tear them apart, including John Kelly, Mike Pompeo, and Mike Pence's representative, Mark Short, in that meeting. Miles Taylor, the former chief of staff for Kirstjen Nielsen, he's the one who essentially blew the whistle on this. This is just so wrong. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Yes. Thank you, Tom, for taking my call. I just wanted to know if you find this as amusing or disgusting as I did. The usual from George Scarborough, or Jennifer Rubin. They're just like Ronald Reagan would be appalled at the way this party is going. Oh, this guy.
No, Reagan would love it. This is exactly what Reagan was heading towards. Privatize the whole damn government.
About it. They're talking about, he's turning over in his grave. Elaine Jordan, too. Who ran Rand Paul's party to get him elected. And I'm thinking, right, this is the same guy who fired Petco that started when I had a union job in 1970, fired every union member, that government's bad for you, this is bad. And now he'd be appalled the way Reagan. Come on, I said, if he could, his thumb would be up through his grave, going, yeah, I'm with you, boys. How disgusting this Joe Scarborough is. He's a true Republican. I do all I can to watch that guy. I can't stomach him. He's a phony.
Well, and I guarantee you, after the election, when people start lobbying for Medicare for all, or even for a damn public option, the ability to buy into Medicare, Joe Scarborough and we'll wait and see on the rest of the Republicans who are on MSNBC. But certainly Joe Scarborough will be out there going, we've got to keep the insurance companies in this mix. I mean, they've got, you got billionaires here who are, at stake. I mean, we can't reduce the profits of these billionaires and multimillionaires. United Healthcare, they've paid 2 CEOs over $1 billion each. They've got 100 employees who are making over $1 million a year. You want to cut their revenue? Really? That's what Joe Scarborough is going to say.
Well, Tom, I seen a guy this week on Sunday, Channel 7, a portfolio guy, and he even said it. He said, you rich people have got to pay taxes because we are broke because of this pandemic. There's no two ways about it, and you're going to get Medicare for all. I've heard that now for the last year, Tom. Billionaires are going to have to pay their share, because this pandemic has just drained our economy. And Medicare for all the people who don't like it, sometime it's coming. Even
well, Medicare for all will save us $1 trillion a year. I mean, we're spending more than twice as much as any other country in the world for health care. We spend about $2.5 trillion a year on health care, and Medicare for all would cut that in half. I mean, it's just crazy. Russ, thank you for the call. Yeah, if we got the profit motive out of medicine and basically had the government replace these insurance companies, we could all have good health care for half the cost. I'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out and dust was 2 to are 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, Devoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. Devoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher Ketchum. Coming up on the Science Revolution, Noah Greenwald from the Center for Biological Diversity is here on Trump's latest actions to weaken the Endangered Species Act. You know, as we destroy the wild, we destroy ourselves. Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, drops by and says it is terrifying to have a president who is psychotic and explains why Trump hates anyone who is loved. Former Assistant Secretary for Health under Obama, Dr. Howard Koh, tells us how Biden will handle this pandemic we're in. And lastly, in Geeky Science, we find out how our bones are made of stars. The Science Revolution, wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, I should have started by mentioning how what a brilliant job I thought the DNC did last night with the convention. If you watched it, it was extraordinary. I think that this virtual convention this year has actually been a lot more interesting, a lot more informative, and frankly a lot more motivating than the ones that I've seen that are filled with drunken revelers, basically. The moment last night when that little boy who is a stutterer, and I think he lived in New Hampshire, and Joe Biden was there for some event and gave a speech, and the kid came up afterwards and told him that he was a stutterer, and Biden essentially said, "Well, stick around, we'll talk, privately." And then after people had left, he sat down with this little boy and showed him his speech. That he had marked where to pause so that his stuttering wouldn't get. Biden has figured out how to work around his instinct to stutter. He's been a stutterer his whole entire life. And this kid was telling the story of his being a stutterer and how Biden helped him. I mean, it was just like, wow. And this was just like, some kid who was it wasn't like the son of some senator or whatever. I just thought that was really impressive. And, I know we mentioned it yesterday afternoon, but also there is this whole Steve Bannon thing and Eric Prince and, all the other guys who are Chris Kobach, the other guys that are up to their eyeballs in this scam to rip off racists. And I find myself very conflicted. They stole $25 million from gullible racists, people who wanted to have a wall built to keep brown people out of our country. Not just racists, but stupid racists. racists who aren't even smart enough to figure out that if somebody in Mexico wants to come to the United States, all they have to do is come in as a tourist and stay. They can just, drive across the border. I don't know what it is now with the pandemic, but it used to be 1 million people a day went back and forth, across the Mexican border in cars, not to mention tens of thousands of people a day in airplanes. But these racists, they're just not that bright. And in fact, there's video that just came out this morning of Bannon and one of the guys that he got arrested with, joking about how we're here on our yacht in the French Riviera, and then he says, "No, with the money we took from the Build the Wall Foundation." And then he joked, and then they get a good laugh, and then he says, "No, we're actually here in wherever it was, South Carolina or something." And but these guys, they know their marks. I got another email this morning I got one from the Trump campaign, and I got one from a super PAC associated with Trump. And that Trump and his buddies there's 3 different super PACs that are emailing me every single week on behalf of Donald Trump using the Trump-Pence logo, using that campaign logo. And those guys are piling up tens, hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be in Donald Trump's pocket when he loses the election. Or I should say, if he loses the election. Let's not jinx this thing. Anyhow, to your calls. As I said, it's Anything Goes Friday. Lee in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Lee, what's up?
Hi. Yeah.
Hey, Lee.
Well, the reason I wanted to call is because you earlier mentioned the benefits package that the post office has to set aside for the next 75 years worth of employees. And you mentioned that it covers the medical. So what I thought is passing Medicare for all will benefit the post office hugely, because the amount that's now covered by the post office in their benefits package would be freed up for them to use in something else, because Medicare for all would cover all that.
Yeah, it was a real statement of faith by the Republicans that they were going to require the post office to set aside $5 to $6.5 billion a year to pay for the health care costs of retirees 75 years out. It assumes that for the next 75 years, we won't have Medicare for all. We won't have single-payer health care. And you're absolutely right, Lee, and that's a point that needs to be made repeatedly, frankly.
Yeah, in our protest,
thank you very much.
It could do that. It could do that in our protest. We mentioned that this will also save the post office.
There you go. I'm with you. Lee, brilliant. Thank you. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
I just want to make a shout out to Ed Markey. And, I'm kind of disgusted that my Congressperson Pelosi is backing Kennedy. I guess it's those old families instead of Markey's been there. And I wonder if it's because she's insulted because he was in part of that Green New Deal. But, I mean, some people, what would happen if Ro Khanna, if you ask him if he could go, put his voice out there for Shahid Buttar? I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry. I just had to get that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. It concerns me. I don't live in Massachusetts. I don't follow the race that closely. But Ed Markey is a good man and a good progressive.
He is.
And Joe Kennedy, he's okay. But I don't get it. It's like, let's bring back the Kennedy dynasty. We're going to position this guy to be the next Teddy. I just don't know the logic here, and it concerns me. It troubles me. I agree with you, Jeff. Thank you, Kevin in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
So I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that they do not have to mail and shouldn't mail their absentee ballots back. They should
depends on where you live.
Get them mailed to them, and then they can turn them in directly into either their city council, or they'll have places designated, or they'll have drop boxes specifically for the ballots to make sure.
Depends on where you live, Kevin. There are some red states that will not have drop boxes at all. And probably the majority of the red states will not have drop boxes at all. There are states where you can't even vote by absentee ballot without obtaining the permission of the state and submitting a doctor's slip. Texas, for example, they're not going to have drop boxes. In fact, there's not going to be that much vote by mail because you've got to prove that you're disabled in order to vote in Texas. And being afraid of COVID is not enough. Greg Abbott has said, that's not enough to justify a vote by mail. So, I get your sentiment, and in Wisconsin, no doubt that's true, but we have to acknowledge, we have to realize that there are states where, voter suppression has been the way of life for Republicans for, a century now, and they're going to keep on doing it. They're going to absolutely keep on doing it. But yes, if you can get your ballot into to be counted without having to run it through the post office, good idea. Otherwise, get it in as early as you can. Gretchen in West Covina, California. Hey, Gretchen, what's up? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Mr. Hartmann, why did Rick Perry resign from the Department of Energy as head a few months back? Why did he do that?
I don't recall. I don't know. Do you know?
Well, I don't have a computer, and the libraries are closed where they do. So I wrote the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I got a phone call from them, and the lady back east went on her computer and said that he resigned due to a scandal in Ukraine. But she didn't know the details, so I have no clue.
Wow. Yeah, Rick Perry was in Ukraine with Gordon Sondland. Remember, he was at some meeting where Gordon Sondland was like trying to find dirt on Hunter Biden. And Rick Perry was, up to his eyeballs in that, so that might have had something to do with it. I'm sorry, I don't recall the specific reason why Rick Perry left, Gretchen, but fascinating. Thank you. Barbara in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Barbara, what's up? Thanks for listening to WMNF.
Yes, hi, Tom. I used to think that facts and truth had a chance of kind of turning the tide in the favor of, up against the liar in chief. But I think what we're dealing with is something really irrational. And I came across an excerpt of a book called on Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She wrote The Warmth of Weather's Sons. But anyway, she talks about caste, and she draws a line to how caste engenders a kind of narcissism amongst the people at the top of the caste. And the malignant narcissism and projecting that onto a narcissistic president is really kind of dangerous to the whole country. And so what I wanted you to do is possibly convene some psychiatrists and psychologists to talk about how do we fight the irrational, that we're up against, because we can't just tell them the truth because then they just call it fake news. And one thing I thought of was that you have to find the perfect nickname for a bully. He comes out and gives names to people, and I call him Agent Orange. I kind of refused to say his name and came up with kind of Rumpty Dumpty as a name. But I think we have to, in dealing with a narcissist, we have to figure out how to puncture that narcissist.
How about the failed con man, Donald Trump?
Failed con man, I like that. That's a great one.
I mean, it doesn't rhyme or anything like that. It's not like a nickname, but or the impeached president. I mean, it's.
We've got to start, not using his name, but puncturing his.
Don
image.
the Con. I mean, Don the Con.
Don the Con. That's a good one too.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Barbara, I got to move along.
And I recommend Caste.
Okay, Caste. I just wrote that down by Barbara or Elizabeth Wilkerson. You said, right?
And it's great. And it's an excerpt in the New York Times Magazine section.
I'll do it. Thank you, Barbara. We'll be back.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday, and just a heads up, the full next hour is going to be Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and I believe he's going to be grilling DeJoy next week, all taking your calls. And welcome back. Jacqueline in Anaheim, California. Hey, Jacqueline, what's up?
Hello, Professor Hartmann. I was calling because I was watching the convention. I know you spoke about the young man, Braden Harrington, who had a stutter that Vice President Biden was helping. And just, comparing him with Trump, there's really no comparison. But just thinking about how he mocked that disabled reporter, I have a difficult time pronouncing his name. Just the difference between Sergei Kovalevsky, I think. It's just amazing, these two people. Before you even get into policy or even experience, just the people themselves Trump was he's just horrible. And, Joe Biden is just such a different, incredible, just decent person. And I was just really impressed by that. I wasn't surprised, but I was impressed.
Yeah. I think that was the main message, about Joe Biden is let's return to decency. Let's turn away from this lying, cheating, philandering, raping con man, and turn our country essentially over to a truly decent human being. And, it's something that we need to be doing. Jacqueline, thank you. David in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, let me mute my TV here. I wasn't able to get in when you were talking to Mark Polk of the Progressive Caucus. Is there any way that they can do a physical audit of the post office and get a physical count of all the sorting machines and blue boxes that were ripped off the curb and stuff? Does that take a special procedures through Congress from one of the congressmen?
The post office has all that information, David. The post office has all that information. The post office has all that information, David. And this morning, more than one Democratic senator asked DeJoy to provide them with all the paperwork and all the studies that were done, which would include the analysis that has the information you're talking about, that led up to these decisions. Asked if he would provide that simply to the Senate, not even hey, put it on the front page of the New York Times, but would you give that to us because we have oversight over you? And DeJoy said no, screw you.
Yeah, I know that. That's why I'm saying we need to do a physical audit of all these sorting plants that are out through the country, so we know exactly how many machines.
But it's already been done. The post office has that information. I mean, who else is going to get the information other than the post office? I think they need to hold this guy in contempt of Congress.
Oh, I agree with you. Oh, definitely. But we should have that information. The public should have that information as to the amount of sorting machines that were ripped off the floor and stuff. That's what I'm saying. The public needs to know this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And instead, what we're getting from Republicans, you got Ron Johnson going, oh, these calls are all saying the same thing. I think the Democrats are coordinating these calls. Well, what people are calling and saying is my damn mail is late. Don't take away my mail. That doesn't require a Democratic campaign, number one. And number two, then you get Rand Paul coming along saying, well, if you were a venture capitalist, what do you need me to do to set up the post office so that you can privatize it? It's bizarre. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. So what if Donald Trump loses the election and decides that he's going to punish America for not being sufficiently loyal to him, for not loving him, for not reelecting him? And so he has, Jerome Powell, his hand-picked successor to the, as the new chair of the Fed, who has created $7 trillion out of thin air and used much of it to buy stocks and bonds to prop up the bond market. That's 1/3 of the entire nation's entire annual gross domestic product. What if he orders Powell to stop supporting the stock and bond markets between November 3rd and January 20th? The bottom would fall out of the market. The bottom would fall out of the housing market as well, particularly if inflation started going up, which Powell has already indicated he's going to let happen. And the country would be thrown into something worse than the Republican Great Depression of the 1930s. Is it possible? Well, we've got a video talking about that for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Anything Goes Friday. Keith in Newcastle, Wyoming. Hey, Keith, thanks for listening on Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you. Hey, I wanted to find out, you earlier mentioned about the separated children down the border, and I was wondering, Do we know how many have been adopted or are in foster care in this country? Do we know that number?
This is one of the big problems, Keith, is that the Department of Homeland Security and ICE and all the agencies associated with this have been unwilling to provide that kind of information. We just don't know. The article that I was quoting from earlier, somebody tweeted me, hey, can you provide me with the documentation? It's in the Washington Post. It was in the Washington Post this morning. It might be left over from yesterday, but there's also a great piece about this over at dailycoast.com by Gabe Ortiz, who's doing some great reporting. But the one on the Washington Post was, as I recall, or maybe it was the New York Times, I'd have to go back and look, but one or the other, was by Jacob Soboroff, and it's just solid reporting. So I mean, this is a crime, Keith. This is a crime. This is like, we never acknowledged that we tortured people under George W. Bush illegally in violation of the Geneva Convention and our own laws, and we never apologized. And so that moral stain is still on our country. And now we've never acknowledged that we have torn, 5,500 children away from their families, wounding them for life and wounding their parents for life. Can you imagine if your child had been taken away from you by the police and put in a foster home or sold to some family someplace that you don't even know who they are or where they are, and you have no idea where your child is and never will? I mean, it's just breathtaking. Keith, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Bob in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Yes, Tom, what's the likelihood that swing state legislature deciding a Trump victory would happen, Tom, based on just the current goings-on with the election coming up?
If everybody's vote, everybody who is, legally entitled to vote, if all of their votes are actually counted, then I think there's pretty much no chance. But the problem is that Donald Trump and the Republican Party, now yesterday he was talking on Fox News about sending federal troops to polling places. So the guys in camo are going to show up at the polling place, and they're going to be inspecting my ID before I get in, and they're going to be challenging me, and they're going to be threatening me. Guys with guns? Really? I mean, this is what Trump was bragging about last night on Hannity's show, that this is what he's going to do. And the GOP from the early 1980s until last year, or maybe the year before, 2018, I believe it was under a consent decree, under a court order requiring them not to intimidate people at the polling places. That consent decree, or whatever it was called, that court order has expired. And so, they have already recruited 50,000 goons who are going to, quote, do, election monitoring, in quotes. And this is going to be really, really ugly. Bob, thanks a lot for the call. Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, if I had DeJoy on the stand, I would be asking him, if your efforts are to improve the quality of service at the post office, why are you doing things that you would never do at your private sector company? At XPO, you wouldn't tear out a bunch of equipment unless you had brand new equipment filling half your parking lot ready to be installed the next day. Why are you creating choke points that are angering 90% of your clientele? You would never do that at XPO. You're
XPO, of course, is the company that he sold for $650 million. As a starting point, absolutely. I'm with you, Rich. And frankly, somebody needs to raise the point that these guys are trying to privatize the post office. That's what's going on here. Deborah in Denver. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to talk about the New York Police Union and how they're desensitized. When we lost all of the people during 9/11 in that attack, everybody was horrified, and yet we have almost 200,000 people dead, and we have the majority of a big chunk of that was from New York. And if it were up to the Republicans, we wouldn't have any unions at all, including police unions. I just think that they're desensitized, and how could you possibly support Donald Trump, who withheld equipment, who withheld testing and funds from New York, and he let all those people die while he played golf and he crashed our economy. What do you think about all of this? I just wish that there was more attention put on this, because they're supposed to be protecting us. And I'm in Colorado, and I am just horrified by what they did.
Yeah. One of the things we know, Deborah, is that jobs that involve uniforms and guns are jobs that people who have authoritarian personalities, authoritarian follower personalities typically, are more likely to apply for. So you've got, in any police department, you've got people who are authoritarian followers well overrepresented. They may be 15 or 20% of the population. In a police department, they're probably 60, 70%. That's just a guess on my part. I don't know that anybody has done a good study on this. But, authoritarians know authoritarians, and authoritarians trust authoritarians. They share a worldview. And so the police and Donald Trump, I think, view the world the same way, as filled with evil people who need to be crushed and controlled. So I think that's what's going on. Deborah, thank you. I share your horror and appreciate the call. We'll be back with Congressman Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. And deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us for the hour is the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna. He represents the Silicon Valley area of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, Khanna.com. senate.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep Row Khanna. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program. Thank you. I am just astonished that not a single, to the best of my knowledge, I told my listeners earlier, there's probably about 10 minutes of this morning's hearings that I missed. But it appeared to me that not a single Democratic senator asked what I think is the 600-pound gorilla question, or the elephant in the room, or whatever metaphor you want to use, or cliche, which is, when did federal agencies have to start operating at break even or for profit? When did the Department of Defense have to make a profit? When did the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, or, the Education Department now it's called, have to make a profit? When did HHS have to make a profit? And why is it that the Postal Service, which is called Service, we're being told it has to run like it's the Postal Corporation or the Postal Company? What the hell is going on? I think Rand Paul gave the whole thing away this morning when he essentially said, if you were a venture capitalist, Mr. DeJoy, what do you need me to do as a senator to set the post office up for privatization? Your thoughts?
Well, that's a great line of inquiry. And since I'm on the Oversight Committee on Monday and we'll be questioning DeJoy, maybe I can take that line of inquiry up with him. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the Department of Defense, Department of Health are great analogies. We would never say that they need to operate as a profit. This is a public good, and it should be treated as a public good. Now, he may push back and say, well, there's efficiency and we want things to be the best for consumers, but that's not the reality. I mean, the reality is that fine, if it's subsidizing it, that should be a public good.
Yeah, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, the only federal agency that operates within a budget where the amount of money that they bring in has to balance or exceed the amount of money that goes out is Social Security. And Donald Trump and the Republican Party in the last month have proposed that Social Security become basically a welfare program funded out of the general fund. In other words, they want to take away that let's run it like a business thing for Social Security, but they want to double down on it for the post office. It just blows my mind. Anyhow, welcome to the program. Is there anything you wanted to start with, or shall we just get right over to our phone callers?
I think we can get over to our phone callers. I mean, a lot of the work we're doing right now in Congress is on the post office. We're going to pass the bill on Saturday for the $25 billion. I'm questioning him on Monday. How concerned are you? I mean, he's telling people these 3 days. He's guaranteeing the ballots are going to be in 3 days. My sense is that is something he's just saying, and the damage has largely been done, and that we need to do far more to get accountability.
Yeah, I share your concern, and I think you're right. And just for our listeners, for people who might have just tuned in, Congressman Ro Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He will be with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. And Zach in North Hollywood, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Morning, gentlemen. I'm just going to get straight to my question. Does a completely unredacted Mueller report exist in a cloud somewhere? And could it be accessed? Could a declassified version of it be accessed by the Freedom of Information Act at some point?
It does exist, but the Freedom of Information Act, they would claim that there's information in there that's classified that shouldn't be released. So you would have to have a president declassify aspect of it, which if Biden wins, he could do.
Okay. Whoop. Diane in Flemington, New Jersey. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. I have a question for Rep. Khanna. Have you ever heard of something called the Presidential Emergency Action Documents? That's abbreviated PEADs. I did some reading on these. Okay, well, this is so important, Representative Khanna. Apparently, these are executive orders, proclamations, and messages to Congress that are prepared in anticipation of a range of emergency scenarios. They are designed to implement extraordinary presidential actions in response to extraordinary situations. I read about this on the Brennan Center site, an article by Elizabeth Goyton and Andrew Boyle. They are not subject to congressional oversight. And do you remember when Trump said, I have the right to do a lot of things that people don't even know about? This may be what he is referring to. Apparently, the Department of Justice, that's Bill Barr, reviews the proposed changes and additions for legal soundness. Emergency Management Agency plays a coordinating role, and the NSC provides policy direction and final approval.
Yeah.
These
Diane,
are
let's let Congressman Khanna answer your question.
Certain.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you raising that, and I will look into those declarations and orders. I mean, obviously, there's a concern with this president that he's going to try to stretch his authority in any way and defy Congress, defy the popular will. So we definitely need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared, particularly as we're headed into a contentious election, the outcome of which he's saying he basically is not going to recognize. I mean, he's now basically saying that explicitly. So we definitely need to be prepared for these scenarios.
Mark in Portland, Oregon, listening on Sirius XM. Mark, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. I'm wondering if there's any legislation that Ro Khanna is aware of that, provided that the Democrats win all three branches, that can be passed, that can be like an anti-corruption, RICO-based legislation against government employees at all levels of government, so that we don't have this level of corruption where lobbyists are now regulators of the industries that we're regulating them. Is there some kind of legislation you could tell us that we can get in and have it signed and say, look, no more lobbyists can regulate the industries that you're being in charge of?
Mike, that's an excellent point. We do have legislation like that. Elizabeth Warren has proposed it. I proposed it in the House to end the revolving door, to make sure that you can't be also having the industry executives regulating the very industries that they were either serving in or that they plan to go back to, and that you need to have at least a 10-year window where you weren't in the industry or can't go back to the industry. And I hope that that can pass with the new president.
Eileen in Wattingers Falls, New York. Eileen, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi, Tom and Congressman. My question is, I keep hearing Trump talk about us pulling out of Syria, but we keep the oil. Basically, isn't that a war crime, and why isn't that being addressed? I don't understand how that works. Can someone explain that to me? Thank you.
Eileen, it is against international law to go and take oil fields from another sovereign country, and that would be a complete violation of the law. So far, fortunately, the administration hasn't done this, but you never know with the bluster of Trump whether he's actually going to act on it. It would be a disaster and a fuel further terrorism against the United States. So I completely agree with you that Congress would have to do everything possible to stop appropriations if the military actually were starting to take over oil fields.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds left. Is there any effort by Congress to do anything about Trump basically turning the Kurds over to Erdogan to be slaughtered?
There was a lot of effort initially to say that we needed to have an agreement with Erdogan, a commitment that he doesn't go into that region and slaughter the Kurds, and that we needed some protection. What we really need is a new president to be able to enforce that, because Congress doesn't have much jurisdiction to do that.
Amen. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna right after this.
Hi, Mimi Kennedy here. An election.
And welcome back. Doug in Elma, Washington. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Has it ever been mulled over, any kind of legislation? I mean, I imagine it'd have to be an all Democratic, all three branches, that if somebody wants to come in and run for president as a Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, that the first requirement before they sign up is that they have to show up with 10 years worth of IRS tax returns, period. If you haven't got 10 years worth, go away. 10 years to date.
I agree with that, and I think we need to have a requirement in the law that calls for the making public your tax returns. I mean, just like there's requirements by the law that I have to have my financial disclosures and financial disclosures of people who have conflict of interest. And so what Trump has shown actually is all of the places where our laws weren't strong enough, which he abused, but in some cases, like not revealing his tax returns, he abused it legally. I mean, he's not violating the law. And so what we need to do is codify those norms so that we don't have further abuse by someone like Trump.
Let's see here. Hamilton, is that Knoxville, Tennessee?
Yes, it is. Hello.
Okay. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. I sure appreciate it. I got a question about poll watchers and the problem with harassment with poll watchers and why it's being done. Do you think they have a plan to help reelect him with the poll watchers?
I do. I'm very concerned. I assume you're referring to the report today that the president plans to send law enforcement to the polls. I mean, they're trying to intimidate and suppress the vote. They're trying to make sure that people fear mailing their ballot. Those ballots take a long time to get to the registrar. And then what's the alternative to mailing? Well, you go on Election Day. And so they're trying to make sure that there's an intimidating presence of law enforcement on Election Day, particularly in minority communities. That could be a huge deterrent. And so it's concerning. I mean, obviously, Trump sees the poll numbers. He sees he's losing, and they're flailing around for any trick to try to hold on to power.
Let's see here. Vicky. Whoop. Hang on just a minute. I got to push the right button. Oh, actually, well, yeah, we have 1 minute. Vicky in Worthington, Ohio. You got a quick one for Congressman Khanna?
Yes, I do. My son just emailed. I live in Ohio, but my son just emailed me. He lives in San Jose, and he has some other property up near Los Gatos, and he is telling me that President Trump is going to withhold all fire mitigation assistance from California, and wondered if that was true and if there's anything that Congress can do about it.
That would be inhumane, but I don't put it past him, and obviously he's threatened that yesterday. I know the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is going to be pushing with Mnuchin that not happen, and Trump needs a stimulus deal for the economy, and him doing that would certainly kill any chances of him getting the stimulus deal. So we are pushing him to not make good on that threat.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna in just a moment. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the Silicon Valley area of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Joe in Cupertino, California. You're on the air with your congressman.
Congressman Khanna, thank you so much. I'm so proud of you for standing your ground. My question is, I heard you the other day on the radio talking about the Lyft drivers, and the situation is pretty bad here because, as you know, we're no longer having that service available in California as of last night. $600 a week was a basic salary, and I thought that would provide at least for the masses. But if you're not going to pay Lyft drivers a living wage, I don't know how that can exist. I'm an old paramedic, and I used to work 24-hour shifts. I used to get paid 13 hours out of 24, and if we got woke up in the middle of the night, they'd pay us for the additional hours, but at least we pay our rent. Do you have a position on this? Are you waiting to be paid, or are you paid to wait if you're a Lyft driver?
Joe, well, I think the issue with Lyft drivers is currently they are being classified incorrectly as independent contractors. And Lyft is saying, well, they want to work part-time and they want to have flexibility. But you can be an employee and work part-time or have flexibility. I mean, when I was a lecturer at a university, I had part-time hours and I had a lot of flexibility, but I was considered an employee. So Lyft's arguments are just disingenuous. I mean, what we need to do is treat these drivers as employees, give them benefits, and then you can still have flexible models and part-time models.
Joe in Gadsden, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, sir. Besides this being an important election to get rid of Trump, I haven't heard a lot about this also being the census year and about how they're going to gerrymandering, like with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I was wondering if they had any plans for that.
For term limits? I'm sorry.
No. He said he's concerned about the census and how the Republicans are basically trying to rig the census.
Yeah, no, I'm very concerned about that. And the challenge is that they are not extending the count period. And that's because the minority communities and hard-to-count communities, they don't want them counted. You know what the irony is? Texas actually has a lower statewide count currently because they're being undercounted. And so you would think a state like Texas, they would want more time to get counted so they can get more seats in Congress. But the members of Congress don't want a fair count. They rather even sacrifice Texas's additional seats because they don't want their districts to become more minority and face a potential minority challenger in those districts. So it's a very cynical strategy to disenfranchise minority communities. And we're doing everything we can on the Oversight Committee to push back and push for more time for counting.
Bob in Palmetto, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Can the enforcement arm of the Postal Service indict the Postmaster General for the malicious destruction of government property? We paid for those machines.
Bob, it's outrageous when you see the images. It is really theft and destruction of property. I think there should be a referral to the Justice Department. Obviously, in this case, referring something to Bill Barr isn't going to do anything. But the statute of limitations is 5 years. And so I do think that DeJoy has put himself at risk of a criminal exposure, especially in a new administration.
David in Spotswood, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is, if somehow Donald Trump steals or wins the election, will we get a Senate majority now or a congressional majority now or 2 years from now? Could the congressman envision Congress impeaching Donald Trump?
I mean, I hope it doesn't come to that, but absolutely, I could envision a second impeachment based on new actions that were illegal. But I think we have to do everything we can to win this election. As President Obama talked about, if Trump gets in, the tactics that he's using to decap the Postal Service, to have law enforcement at polling, just think about all of those actions that he could continue to undertake and then put a Supreme Court that's going to be even more conservative. You could really see the erosion of institutional democracy.
Paul in Portland, Oregon. We have about 45 seconds. I see you've got a very quick question here, though. Go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to know if hearing any blowback from your fellow congressmen and women about rural areas with like the California fires. The Postal Service is kind of the cement of those local areas that are being impacted in the rural America. What are you hearing?
Well, it's a great point, and it's why I think the Postmaster General, at least publicly, is backing down because the pressure came not just from Democrats, but a lot of rural communities where they said, we need this for our medicine, we need this for our daily business activity, and you see him at least publicly backing off. The question is what he's going to do behind the scenes.
Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, our national town hall meeting here, taking your calls. He represents the Silicon Valley area of California. He, in the U.S. House of Representatives, he is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the number 2 big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C. We'll be back with more of your calls for him right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can find Congressman Khanna's website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna. Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads, and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Coming up on the Science Revolution, Noah Greenwald from the Center for Biological Diversity is here on Trump's latest actions to weaken the Endangered Species Act. You know, as we destroy the wild, we destroy ourselves. Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, drops by and says it is terrifying to have a president who is psychotic, and explains why Trump hates anyone who is loved. Former Assistant Secretary for Health under Obama, Dr. Howard Koh, tells us how Biden will handle this pandemic we're in. And lastly, in Geeky Science, we find out how our bones are made of stars. The Science Revolution, wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings, Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman Khanna, this happened to my friend yesterday. Our census canvassers required to have a federal ID. What happened was somebody came up to her house and claimed that she was a census worker but had no ID. if they're not required to have an ID, this could very much throw off the census because people think it's scammers.
Margaret, that's a great question. I assume that they have to have some form of identification. I can check that, but it would surprise me if they don't have some form of official identification.
Rachel in Grand, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. Over a year ago, when Wilbur Ross, they first started talking about the census, we got a census package in the mail that's saying we were selected at random to fill out a census form, and I just laid it up. It was first we got a postcard, then we got 2 or 3 reminders, and we got the packet, and it was big packet. They asked a lot of questions, but that's what I was wanting to ask. Was that for real? Do they send that out? I got scared because they said that it was. They kept saying if I didn't send it out, they were going to charge me, and I just wondered if that's for real. Thank you,
Rachel. Isn't it amazing, Congressman Khanna, how Americans don't trust their government since we've got this guy who's told 20,000 lies in the White House?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is really a problem. I mean, that he has really diminished the trust in government. But on the census, Rachel, the fact is that it's a voluntary participation. I mean, I hope everyone will participate and be counted, but they can't do anything to you if you don't participate, and they also can't do anything with your data. I mean, the data is secured, it's confidential. You fill it out, and they can't abuse that data in any way. And so my hope is everyone will fill it out, and that is a trustworthy process. Though what they're trying to do is put fear in people so that they don't fill it out, and so we have an undercount of minority and disadvantaged communities.
Ed in Roselle, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. My question goes to Democratic messaging. Tom has talked about this numerous times over the years, the two Santa Claus theory of government. Whereas when the Republicans are in, they spend money like a drunken sailor. When they're out of power, they scream about the debt. I just explained that in less than 5 seconds. And yet, when I call my Democratic senators, their aides aren't familiar with this. When I ask them about it, I've yet to see any Democrats, when they have any kind of airtime on radio or TV, bring this up. And if we're fortunate enough to get the Senate and the House this next election, I think that's going to be really important for every Democratic congressman and senator to be able to expose that theory or espouse that theory numerous times so that the rest of the American people know about it and make sense to them. Because when you do explain it to people, their eyes go wide and they say, yeah, that is how it works. And why do the Democrats not push this theory forward whenever they get any kind of airtime? That's my question.
But I agree with you. I mean, I think that the reality is that they only complain about deficits. They only cry about deficits when Democrats want to spend on programs for people. They have no concern about deficits when it's about increasing defense spending, getting into foreign wars, or bailing out Wall Street. And that's a message that we need to continue to hammer home, especially because they're going to start talking about deficits the day Vice President Biden wins.
Yeah, to the two Santa Claus piece of that, just FYI, in the mid-'70s, I think it was 76, Jude Wanniski was, a rising star in the Republican Party and a strategist. And he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that Democrats had always been the Santa Claus party. They gave us Social Security, unemployment, Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. He went through the whole list. And Republicans opposed all those things. They were seen as the Scrooge party. And he said the Republican Party has to become has to have their own Santa Claus, and they have to figure out a way to force the Democrats to shoot their Santa Claus. And the way to do that is to become the tax cut Santa Clauses. That was Judah Wanniski's phrase, to always promote tax cuts when Republicans are in power. And then when Democrats are in power, scream about the deficit produced by the tax cuts and use that to cut social programs so that the Democrats will be forced to shoot their own Santa Claus. And David Stockman back in the 80s said this is exactly what Reagan was doing. He came into office, the national debt was $800 billion. When he left, it was over $2 trillion. He tripled the national debt. And every Republican president since then has been following this same course that Judah Wanniski laid out in 1976 or 77, FYI. I'm guessing you probably already knew that, but I just wanted to get on the record.
I did not. That's fascinating to me, Tom. So I love coming on the show. I learn something every time.
Thank you. Google Two Santa Clauses in my name. You'll find the actual documentation, links to the original story. But like I said, Republicans have been talking about this out loud since the 80s, that this is what they're doing. Larry in Asheville, North Carolina. Larry, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I grew up in the Rust Belt, and it could be that some of the swing voters out there will take a look at Democratic proposals or the past 4 days of a virtual convention, and not hearing any nuts and bolts direct dealing with the enormous deficits, debt, and trade imbalance, and in addition, where was Sherrod Brown? So is there a movement in Congress to help push the DNC to come up with a good, honest, nuts and bolts discussion that goes rebuilding industry, that goes beyond infrastructure and clean energy? Thank you.
Sorry, I definitely think we have to talk about jobs and good jobs and manufacturing jobs, industrial jobs, tech jobs in communities left behind. And Sherrod Brown did, I think, have a small cameo appearance there. I mean, Sherrod's terrific on these issues of dignity of work, of bringing jobs to these communities, and certainly clean tech has to be part of it, but the jobs need to be much broader than that. And Biden has a plan. He alluded to it in his acceptance speech, but I agree with you that we need to hammer that point home a lot more in the home stretch.
Jack in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I'd just like to know the congressman's position on the cuts that Amtrak is going to experience October 1st to their long-haul train service. They're being cut from 7 days a week to 3 days a week.
Oh.
Jack, those cuts are unconscionable. I mean, I think we need to be investing more in public transportation. The one thing I can say is if Joe Biden's president, I can't imagine he won't stand up fully for Amtrak funding given his own life experience. So I certainly oppose those cuts, and thank you for bringing them to our attention.
Howard in New York City. We have a minute to the break. Howard, got a quick one?
Yeah, it's a quick one. I was watching the Senate inquiry, and they wanted theoretical analyses of the effect. Why don't you just mail out 10,000 pieces of mail to soldiers and to veterans, etc., and come up with a real number? Does it take 1 day, 2 days, 6 days? Just make a mailing, a test mailing, and do the analysis.
Howard, I like your point. It makes perfect logical sense, but it assumes good intent. It assumes that the Joy actually wants to make a concerted effort to deliver the mail. I think what he's going to do is he's telling the senators today, we're going to ensure every ballot's done within 3 days. That hasn't been the case in Massachusetts in the primary. He wants to just ride out the public outrage, and then they're going to do what they're going to do come election time. So what you're saying is exactly what he should be doing if he were actually being custodian of the Postal Service.
Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. He represents the Silicon Valley area of California. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, right after this. And Jeff in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Thanks, as always, for the town hall. Congress sabotaging of the post office on the national level. On the state level, there's a massive voter suppression effort in Florida that hasn't gotten much coverage, and it's been Governor Ron DeSantis and the Florida GOP's ploy to impose a poll tax on 1.4 million ex-felons whose voting rights were overwhelmingly restored by the people of Florida voting for Amendment 4 in 2018. Congressman, just like they intervened in Florida in the 2000 election to select Bush as our president, the U.S. Supreme Court has played a part in upholding this poll tax on over 1 million Floridians this year. And on August 11th, Slate.com had a piece titled, "The Supreme Court's Most Partisan Decisions Are Flying Under the Radar."
Jeff, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
It's to ask Congressman Khanna about Congress's ability to exercise power over the Supreme Court's caseload over its so-called shadow docket. And are you aware of this, Congressman Khanna, and is House leadership doing anything to rein in the Supreme Court?
Well, I think I'm very aware of the situation of Florida. I mean, the disenfranchisement of felons to basically a poll tax. I mean, they ask that they have to pay back all their debts, even though they don't have any money because they've been in jail, is absurd. And what we ought to do is pass a statute that overturns the case that the Supreme Court came up with. Unfortunately, we can't do that with the Republicans in the Senate, but once we have a majority back, we need to do that. And I agree with you that the Supreme Court was wrong in this case.
Tim in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thanks, guys. Always appreciate it. What a fantastic team we have. With Colin Powell coming out against Trump and ex-military leaders the last few months, and I've heard things, Tom, I think on your show, where some different Republican people who were trying to get reelected in the South had taken Trump out of their advertising. Are we seeing a wave of him losing support, conservatives, et cetera, coming out against Trump? Reminds me of what finally did in Nixon. Are we hopefully in that kind of a situation?
Chad, I think we've seen a number of more independent or moderate Republicans come out against Trump, but his support hasn't eroded in the Congress or the Senate. I mean, other than Romney, I don't think there are many senators or House members who have criticized him. So in Nixon's case, obviously the leadership within the House and some of the senators turned on him. In this case, I think it may matter and will matter electorally. It gives him a much more uphill road to re-election. But I don't think it will matter in terms of the current Senate or House holding him accountable on the Republican side.
Have you heard from anybody what the lineup is for the RNC next week? We've got about 15 seconds.
You know, I haven't, and I think they're behind. I mean, they just went to a virtual convention a few weeks ago, and it's hard to pull off. I mean, the one thing I'll give the DNC credit for is they had really put a lot of work into those videos and designing the convention.
Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. I thought this virtual convention was actually more interesting, more accessible, and more informative than the previous ones that I've watched, where, you know, it's just a bunch of drunken revelers by and large. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna in just a moment. Stick around. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, yeah, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Judy in Denver, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Khanna, we have more than 65 million Americans that are unemployed. 38 million are looking at homelessness. How does the HEROES Act or I think you're working on another bill to help, but how do any of these help any of the 65 million and the 38 million Americans and that need real help instead of helping the corporations, mass murderer Donald Trump, and the Catholic and Christian churches have gotten hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions.
Judy, I share your concern. The initial coronavirus relief bills gave too much to Wall Street, to corporations. I mean, the idea that the Fed can buy junk bonds but can't provide direct capital or assistance to minority businesses and small businesses just shows the prioritization of monetary policy in this country. Now, what Congress needs to do and what the HEROES Act does is really prioritize providing stimulus checks and providing unemployment extension to actually the working class and the middle class. And that's what we need to do with this next stimulus.
Corinne in Minneapolis, Minnesota. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna, and correct me if I've mispronounced your name.
Oh, that's fine. Congressman, I am very concerned that on Monday, the House committee that will be questioning Postmaster General DeJoy, that they don't, I want them to ask him what, if he wanted to work on saving money for the post office, why didn't he start with having Congress repeal the 2006 bill that requires them to pay the retirees' health benefits 75 years in advance? I listened to part of the Senate questioning this morning, and none of the Republican senators, surprisingly, asked him about that at all. They went on with other things that sort of helped him justify the cuts that he had made.
You're absolutely right. That 2006 bill puts a huge constraint on the post office, which we don't do for any other agency, which requires them to put aside funding for 75 years of pensions. And it again goes back to Tom's point that we shouldn't be putting the profitability constraints on the postal service, and certainly not these unreasonable requirements of them having to put 75 years worth of savings for their current employees.
Andy in Vancouver, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi, Congressman. I wanted to ask a question. I was wondering what your thoughts are on incentivizing part-time and full-time actual employment by reconstructing the tax code so that temporary employees and 1099 employees are not 100% tax deductible write-off, and maybe upping the employee percentage from 80 to 90% to incentivize proper employment.
Oh, that's a great idea.
That's a great idea. I mean, I think we need a better law on unemployment classification so you don't have misclassification. But to the extent that deductibility is putting an incentive to outsource, that's an idea worth exploring.
James in North Hollywood, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Mr. Khanna. I wonder if you would consider running for Senator Harris's seat if she becomes the VP.
James, I appreciate that. I am focused, obviously, on making sure we win first. It's not anywhere near a slam dunk. It's going to be a tough, drag-out fight. And then I'll see where I can be most useful in a progressive direction. The Progressive Caucus has gotten very strong in the House, so that's a consideration. But obviously, I'll keep all of the options open and look seriously at it.
Renee in Burbank, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, gentlemen. Today at the hearing, DeJoy kept being asked by people if he was going to replace the sorting machines that he had taken out, and he kept answering they are not needed. And he repeated that answer. Is there any way Congress can force him to replace those machines?
And Congress could. We'd have to pass a statute directing him to do that. And I think we should. I mean, I think we need to continue to push, but legislatively direct him to what to do with the money.
Steve in Topanga, California. Got a minute to the break. Steve, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm wondering about, is there any contingency plans for if Trump loses insurrection, how all his people come out, like you would bust a union, but I'm talking about the whole country being busted as a union. And then these, what is the contingencies on the Democrats to make sure this won't happen? Anyway, I just hope you guys are thinking about that. Anyway, thanks, guys. Have a good week.
It's a very legitimate concern. I mean, the concern is that Trump is up on Election Day and doesn't wait till all the absentee ballots come in, which would give Biden a big lead, and declares victory and tries to get state legislatures to certify him, and that there's a confrontation. And I think that's why you see people like Obama and others warning that democracy is at stake. I think what Congress needs to be proactive, think about maybe preemptively having a commission, a bipartisan commission with Roberts or others to try to resolve any of these kind of disputes.
Yeah. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's always great having you on.
Thanks, Tom. Always enjoyed it.
Thank you. Congressman Ro Khanna, khanna.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna. We'll be right back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind today? Is it the post office? Is it UFOs? Is it children being taken from their families by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by N.B. Turner. It's titled, Is China an Imperialist Country? And it's from a relatively Marxist point of view. I think you'll find it fascinating. This is from the introduction. It has long been known and understood that the entire world has been under the control of capitalist imperialism. For a time, a section of this world broke from it, beginning with the victory of socialism in Russia and continuing through the Chinese Revolution, constituting a socialist world. Yet in time, the socialist countries, through internal class struggles in politics and economics, were seized by capitalist conciliators and advocates, and then by capitalists themselves, who were largely within the ruling communist parties themselves. First in Russia and later in China, when these counter-revolutions and coups took place, there ensued a period of entry and integration into the world imperialist system. The Soviet Union, at first under the existing signboard of socialism, continued much of its established national and economic power relations into a new socialist imperialist bloc, socialist in name, imperialist in reality. The Russian capitalist imperialist attempt to maintain this bloc, or important sections of what had been part of this bloc and its historic allies, has continued in the years since the socialist signboard was discarded. In China, the defeat of the proletariat and the capitalist capture of state power after the death of the great revolutionary Mao Zedong have also led to a period of integration into the world imperialist system. China still operates under a socialist signboard, but has conducted itself unambiguously as a capitalist power. Before the last decade, especially since the demise of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was commonly seen as the sole superpower to which all other powers had to defer. The system which the U.S. had designed at the end of World War II was global in scope and to some more democratic in appearance than the old colonial empires. But it was built around the elitist privilege of power and authority, meaning the U.S. as superpower was at the centerpiece of the controls. But in the last decade, the imperialist world system is not what it used to be. Throughout the world, corrupt and comprador regimes have faced significant and often unprecedented mass popular opposition movements which have revealed the deep instability of the old neo-colonialist arrangements. Even in the EU, the product of imperialist designs to supplant the historic internecine battles, there has emerged ever-deepening crises and conflicts and movements to assert nationalist interests against one another. Against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, the imperialist system was directed by the U.S., has launched wars such as in Iraq and Afghanistan at huge cost, trillions of dollars, and immeasurable losses in political credibility and imperialist authority, as neither war has won any of the U.S.'s objectives. These clear failures at the hand of the largest and most powerful military force in the world do not bode well for maintaining the U.S.'s hegemonic domination of the world's imperialist system. And the economic and financial crises of the last half-decade or more have stirred not only deep discontent, resentment, and popular political opposition within the ranks of the U.S.'s reliable allies, but it has brought to the fore the imperialist anti-U.S. challenges from other major powers, specifically China and Russia. Forces worldwide are studying these changes and considering how they must change the set of options at hand. The all-too-prevalent view that U.S. imperialism is so powerful, so dominant, and so capable of manipulating all manner of forces and bending them to its will has been, and continues to be, a dangerous twisting of reality. The sole superpower in this view has been attributed with omnipotent features that defy effective challenge, that reflect a supposedly skillful control of contradictions and crises that afflicted earlier empires, and that has a boundless ability to disguise its malevolent work. If it were true, it would be a remarkable development in human history. Indeed, it would be, as once touted in the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and bloc by Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. That is, the end of historical conflict and systemic changes. It would be an expression of the boastful and fanciful capitalist post-Mao motto, Tina, there is no alternative to capitalism. There are others who assert that the U.S. is not so omnipotent and that it is in decline and maybe failing, but that the U.S. and its close allies constitute the only imperialism that matters, and that if all its detractors, victims, opponents, and its imperialist rivals band together, liberation will truly be achieved with the demise of U.S. imperialism. This view also holds that whenever big powers like China or Russia rise in opposition to the U.S., they deserve the support and applause from progressive and revolutionary forces. Holding this view are a variety of forces who cling to the notion that the Cold War division of the world is still extant, and that popular protests in recent years from Libya to Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela, as well as Brazil and Turkey, Iran, even inside Western China, are all examples of U.S. meddling and desperate interference. This view holds that without such U.S. manipulation and interference and disruption, the people would, by and large, be happy or passive. This is by any measure an amazing claim, denying the existence of class contradictions and struggles within each of these countries, and making it appear that the conspiratorial powers of the U.S. to manipulate events are unparalleled in reach and effectiveness. In practical political terms, this view distorts the basic reality. Is China an imperialist country? allegiance of white evangelicals in the late 20th century. The book, Revolution of Values.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday in just a few minutes. But first, Ethan Manuel is on the line with us. Ethan is the director of the Sierra Club's Lands Protection Program. SierraClub.org is the website. Ethan's Twitter handle is Ethan, ATHANDC, or, of course, at Sierra Club. Ethan, welcome to the program. Tell us, Trump came out and said he wants to allow big oil companies, major Republican donors, to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I thought we had fought this battle a few times before and won. What's going on?
Well, Tom, great to be on your show. Thanks for the invite. And it's just been a long-running battle, really since the late 80s, to decide the fate of the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. We see it as a biological heart of the Arctic Refuge, someplace that should be protected and preserved forever. And we also see it as a sacred area for the Gwich'in people, indigenous peoples who live near the Arctic Refuge. And, of course, the other side of the aisle has consistently seen it as a place to drill for oil and to ruin it and to industrialize this really special place. And so that fight's been going on and on for almost 30 years. And, unfortunately, in 2017, Congress passed a law, snuck a provision into a larger law that allows drilling in the coastal plain of the Arctic. And that's what we're dealing with right now, the Trump administration trying to ram that plan forward.
So what specifically will be the consequence of this? If, you said, we're going to allow drilling and it's going to industrialize it, but how large an area is this? How much of it will be destroyed? How fragile is the ecosystem? What does this mean in the larger context?
Well, to start with the ecosystem, it really is one of the last wild places left in the United States. It's one of the few places that has never been developed. There's no roads, no trails, no proof of any existence there at all. So it's a truly wild place that supports a varied array of wildlife. Polar bears, caribou, 200 species of birds migrate there every year. So it's an incredibly rich ecosystem that we just think is also very, very fragile. The tundra and that ecosystem is very, very fragile. So any kind of industrialization would damage it pretty much forever. And so that's really what's at stake here. The issue is they want, it's a 1.5 million acre coastal plain. It's very narrow between the Brooks Mountain Range and the Arctic Ocean. And the oil companies want to expand from Prudhoe Bay eastward into this coastal plain. And it's such a narrow strip of land relative to the operations that they want to put in there. Pretty much all of it would be destroyed because, oil is an inexact science. They would poke holes throughout the coastal plain of the refuge and build and accompany those wells with roads and pipelines and other support facilities. So you would take a place that's incredibly wild and pristine and unique and turn it into a big industrial facility full of oil and pollution and other industrial activities.
Ethan, we're hearing stories of global warming changing Arctic environments all around the world, from Siberia to northern Alaska and northern Canada. And they're typically couched in the context of, another city is melting into the ground or falling into the ground. Buildings are tipping over because the permafrost is melting. Roads are becoming unpassable. But I'm guessing that I guess my question is, does this global warming that is, opening up or melting this region, does this make it easier or more difficult for the oil companies to drill in that region?
Well, ironically enough, it makes it kind of more difficult because the companies that operate along Alaska's North Slope really count on the tundra to stay frozen for a certain amount of time so they can build their facilities and their pads and bring in all this heavy equipment. Every year, though, the tundra thaws more and more. So the drilling season for when they can put in new equipment is actually shrinking because of climate change. So, Alaska and Alaska's North Slope is almost a poster child for climate change. You're seeing species change their migratory habits, vegetation change where it grows, tons of erosion into the Arctic Ocean every year. They're having to move Alaska native villages further inland or relocate people who live on islands in the Arctic Ocean to onshore villages. And so the problems being caused by climate change are exacerbated in the poles, and obviously that's where the Arctic Refuge is, close by the North Pole. And so it is kind of ironic that the problem created by the oil industry is actually harming their ability to get more oil.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. So Congress, you said, authorized this in 2017. Trump has now said, let's do it. Is there any mechanism to stop him? And if so, what is it and how's it being played out? Or do we have to just, hope to have a new administration in the next 6 months?
Well, a new administration is part of the solution to this, frankly. But we've got quite a few levers we're starting to pull already. Number one is we talked about the changes happening from climate change in the North Slope. One of the consequences is that the polar bear that lives there is being threatened, and that's listed as a threatened species by the Endangered Species Act. So that gives us quite a bit of ability to sue to protect that habitat. So the first thing we're going to do is sue under the Endangered Species Act and charge that the administration is being haphazard with managing habitat for the polar bear. Because, again, if you go in and do seismic testing to see where the oil is, if you put oil rigs there, we think you're probably going to damage some polar bear dens and have consequences on polar bear habitat and the ability of the polar bear to survive in the Arctic Refuge. So we'll sue under the Endangered Species Act. We probably are going to do a review under the National Environmental Policy Act to see if they're rushing this through. And then also, if there's a new administration, President Biden can step in and put a temporary halt on it, potentially name the coastal plain a national monument, which would set up another court fight that we think we would win. And then ultimately, we need Congress to change the definition of the refuge away from an oil field, which is the way it's currently defined, back to a national wildlife refuge. So we have a lot of things we're going to try and do. We're pretty confident on the court case, but it's really important that we win this election in November for a myriad of reasons, but one of those being to protect the Arctic Refuge.
Amen. Ethan Manuel, the director of the Sierra Club's Lands Protection Program, sierraclub.org, of course. Ethan, thanks so much for dropping by today.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks a lot. Have a great show. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. It's great talking with you. Let's pick up some phone calls here. That was brilliant. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. One of the strategy and tactics of Trump and company, at least as I understand it, is to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and throw as many balls at us, the loyal opposition, as they can, because it's impossible to juggle them all at once. Can't keep your attention on everything. One example being that it was about a week or so ago, it was announced by Trump and company that the last month of the census would be suspended and that the census workers would no longer be out trying to run down every last citizen who didn't fill out their forms. And that's been lost in the consternation about what's happening to the post office. And I would just hope that the Democratic Congress would pass some legislation on this to demand that the census be taken the way that it's always been taken, so that we have the most accurate information possible for redistricting.
Well, given the challenges the door-to-door census takers are facing in an international pandemic, I think, frankly, they need to do it over a much longer period than they traditionally have done, and it needs to be extended into next year, when, hopefully a new administration can take it over, George. Because I don't see the House being able to pass legislation that can make it through the Senate with regard to this. The Republicans are very happy not to have basically what's happening. The low-hanging fruit for the census is wealthy white people. They fill out their census forms, they get them in the mail, they send them right back, and those neighborhoods are easy to walk. But now that we're moving into low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods where you've got significant numbers of people who are not citizens, it gets much more difficult to do. And frankly, I think we need to extend it. But George, I'm with you, and thank you for bringing that up. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In the con and conservative. Thom Hartmann here with you. Talk media for the rest of us. welcome back. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to bring attention to the 750 million genetically modified mosquitoes that are being released. They were starting to be released now. They're saying that they approved it for release, but apparently they've already been testing it around. The company that did it is called Oxitec, Oxitec. It's kind of interesting stuff. There's a lot of concerns about the environmental impact. Basically, what they've done is they've modified the male mosquitoes to impregnate the females, and when that happens, there's going to be a protein, and that's going to kill off the offspring. But what's really interesting about this Oxitec company, and there's an article on it from Armstrong Economics. There's a great article about the company that did a partnership in June with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for actually using these mosquitoes to pass vaccines instead of diseases. So I find it pretty fascinating and all actually really scary. But
Robbie, that sounds like QAnon stuff. Come on,
it's Armstrong Economics.
That is.
Tom. This
yeah,
is
that doesn't mean anything. I mean, it could be Acme. Robbie, I'm telling you, the whole QAnon thing is around Bill and Melinda Gates wanting to vaccinate you and impregnate you with a chip that's going to follow you around and it's going to change the way your brain works. Just because you found a website that says something doesn't mean it's real. Bobby in La Puente, from Bobby to Bobby, or from Robbie to Bobby, in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you, and thank your listeners. I learned you talked about plant medicine earlier. And thank the creator for the plant medicine because I had to experience it. What you talked about, childhood abuse, I suffered. My dad, World War II veteran, blah, blah, blah. And his fix was whiskey. So you can imagine, he was a D-Day, Omaha Beach, liberated the Holy Cause. So anxiety, depression, yes, we weren't diagnosed until 65 years old. And your show happened to help me. It was a documentary, Home Alone, 17 chapters, exploring trauma, PTSD. My daughter checked into it, and I went down south and experienced the medicine. If it hadn't have been for that, I wouldn't be talking to you. Been sober 23 years, but it didn't help. I was still messed up. Honestly, Tom, ayahuasca.
So you're saying, Bobby, if I understand what you're saying right, forgive my interrupting, but we just have a few seconds. Are you saying that you took a psychedelic drug, mescaline, psilocybin, ayahuasca, something like that, and it cured you of PTSD essentially, or helped you?
No, what it does, it eliminates the anxiety. It makes you see what caused it. Now what I'm doing, you still have work. I'm grieving my childhood, not boo-hoo it. No, they grieve it. I never was told that, and now that helps. Mm-hmm. Okay, psilocybin. My wife as well, mushrooms, and that's for me, not for anybody else, and it helps, honestly, because that's part of my roots, my culture. My grandmother, Huicho, Indian, and honestly, I was on benzos 40 years along with opiates, and again, I'm lucky I'm here. Wow. Thank your show. That's why I'm grateful for your show, your callers. Honestly, brother, you're my brother, and man, I couldn't be happier.
Thank you, Bob.
So, stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that you got good results from that and that it helped you in your life. Bobby, thank you so much. And we'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls in just a minute. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, this is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation, end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Hartmut in Kennesaw, Georgia. Hey, Hartmut, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I wanted to address the issue that came up during the Rokana interview. The question is really frustrating to me, and the question I'm speaking about is the question of why is it that the Republicans can spend like drunken sailors, but the Democrats insist on pay-go, on matching any proposal. But listen, here's the thing. That's been well explained a long time ago, really, and it's been the fact is that the Republicans have embraced the fundamental understanding of modern monetary theory that there's since we got off the gold standard, there's no constraint anymore except for inflation, and tax cuts for the wealthy don't have any have virtually no effect on inflation because they don't filter down to the main street. So so the thing is, the Democrats have artificially shackled themselves and shackled basically the people of the United States by insisting on basically on austerity for their proposals, while the Republicans can spend freely without any, the Democrats are.
This is how effective, Hartmut. This is how effective the two Santa Claus con has been. Bill Clinton actually adopted this. I mean, in the last years of the Clinton administration, he was using the word austerity. Democrats took to heart the Republican BS about the negative impact of a big deficit, and now thanks to Reagan, Bush, and Trump, those three presidents have run up virtually 100% of this debt that we have right now, and today the national debt surpassed the national GDP, which was supposed to be the critical point at which the entire economic system of the United States collapses, according to Ronald Reagan, two George Bushes, and Stephen Moore and all these other wackadoodles. And, the simple fact of the matter is Japan, their debt has been 200% of GDP for 30 years. All it does is provide a place where people can save their money.
If you read that bestseller by Stephanie Kelton, The Deficit Myth, it turns out that the national debt is no danger to us at all, and the deficits deficits mean that the government spends more on us than we spend on them through taxes. So it's really a benefit, and as a matter of fact, we've always been, pretty much always been in deficit, and that's always been a boon to the economy. Whereas when Clinton tried to put us, when Clinton achieved a surplus, that was the beginning. According to Kelton, really, that led to the series of economic moves by the Fed that led to the 2008 crash. Yeah. So I mean,
I got it.
Turns out surpluses are bad.
I got it. Good. I don't entirely agree, but largely I absolutely agree with you. And we've got to, Sean, we got to get a copy of Stephanie Kelton's book and get her on this program as a guest. I think that would be okay. She says already on it. Sam in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to make a couple statements first. I think you're the smartest man on television by far, and I guess your book learning did you good. And your videographer is fantastic because those close-up shots you show of Oregon are just awe-inspiring. Anyway, the question is, I want to know if Trump he's already been impeached, and impeachment means that you can't run for office anymore, correct?
No, that would be if he was removed from office by the Senate, he would no longer be eligible to run for federal office.
Okay, that was nobody has explained that to me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Sam. Conrad in San Diego. Hey, Conrad, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First of all, congratulations on you've got so many listeners now. I actually have to wait a while before I can get through. So congratulations on growing your audience.
One of those good problems, I suppose. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
We just have a minute till a break, though, Conrad. You got a quick one here?
Okay. Yeah, we need to replace that oxymoron vocabulary word, minority, majority, with co-equal. Co-equal. I was talking to a friend of mine who's right-wing, and he was concerned, the minorities are going to dominate us once they become a majority. I said, they're not going to dominate us. They're just going to finally rule co-equally with us. You would have thought I slapped him in the face.
Or just become fellow members of our society, Conrad. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And by the way, that tipping point was achieved several years ago. There are more black and brown babies being born in America, or minority babies, let's say, non-white babies being born in America than there are white babies right now. So, wait a couple decades and it's going to, here we are. And I think it's a fine thing. It's a more inclusive country. That is supposed to be our founding ideal. Anyhow, we'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truths, the multinational corporations and fat cat Republicans would really rather you didn't know all about it. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
Thank you.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, Noah Greenwald from the Center for Biological Diversity is here on Trump's latest actions to weaken the Endangered Species Act. You know, as we destroy the wild, we destroy ourselves. Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, drops by and says it is terrifying to have a president who is psychotic and explains why Trump hates anyone who is loved. Former Assistant Secretary for Health under Obama, Dr. Howard Koh, tells us how Biden will handle this pandemic we're in. And lastly, in Geeky Science, we find out how our bones are made of stars. The Science Revolution, wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's Anything Goes Friday. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's up?
Hi, Tom. When's the expiration date on your passport? Where are you going to get it if the post office is gone?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't looked in a while, but I think I still have a few years. But why would they no longer be able to? I mean, they don't issue passports. That's the passport office. They simply have the forms that you fill out and send in.
Yes, but who's going to deal with it? If you can't even go to the post office in a local town, where are you going to go to get? Are you supposed to go out online and fill this important information out so where it can be?
Well, actually, yes. There are a bunch of companies, private for-profit companies, that do rapid turnaround passport. You FedEx your information to them. They literally hire somebody to stand in line at a passport office, not at the post office, but at a passport office. That person then gets your passport processed in 24 hours, and they FedEx it back, so you can get passports in 2 or 3 days. Costs like $100. But I've done it a couple of times over the years, and it's there. And I'm guessing that would be the response of the Republican privatizers is, hey, there's companies that will offer this service.
It's going to cost you more, But
yeah, exactly.
A lot of people who live in rural places, how are they going to be able to do this?
Right. Well, the Republican answer is if you can't afford $100 to get a fast passport, then you don't deserve to have a passport.
Yeah, I know. And also,
we just have to acknowledge these guys.
A friend of mine said that the reason that nobody's going to get any money out of Mitch McConnell is people paid off their payday loans, and they're losing money.
Interesting. Yeah. I kind of doubt that, too. Norma, thank you. I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. Josh in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Josh, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was listening earlier this week, and I wanted to thank you for having Dr. Michael Greger from nutritionfacts.org on to talk about the link between factory farms and pandemic viruses. I just wanted to add to your conversation with Dr. Greger, in addition to making changes towards a plant-based diet for our health and reducing the risk of pandemic virus spread, there's also legislation called the Farm System Reform Act that was introduced by Ro Khanna in the House and Cory Booker in the Senate, that would phase out existing factory farms and stop new CAFOs from being built. And so I encourage everyone to contact their representatives to also support this legislation.
Yeah, amen. And did you know Cory Booker lives on a 100% pure plant-based diet? He's a vegan.
So does Tulsi Gabbard. There's a few vegans now.
And so does Bill Clinton.
Two of them ran for president. So it's pretty cool how it's really expanding. And actually, the first gentleman here in Colorado, Governor Polis's husband, is also a vegan.
Yeah, it is spreading. Thank you, Josh. In fact, Louise and I have, we've actually kind of, because we were or speaking for myself, I was slowly gaining weight as, just not exercising, I guess, as much as normal. So now Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're eating a diet that is entirely fruit and green leafy vegetables. And then on the weekends, we'll add grains and starchy foods. And I think I've lost about an inch. I've gained probably 2, and I'm trying to get rid of the second one. But it really works. It's our variation on the 5-2 diet. Now it's a 4-3 diet. But anyway, back to your phone calls. Dave in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann. I heard that Donald Trump has an affinity for Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, he's got his picture hanging next to his head in the Oval Office.
And so in response to that call earlier, said we want to come up with like a handle or a nickname for Donald Trump. So being that Andrew Jackson was the causation of the Trail of Tears, Donald Trump is a gale of fears. So I W King Donald Old Trickery.
Old Trickery, because most people don't realize that Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory, but yeah, I like it. Old trickery. Brilliant. Thanks a lot for the call. Glenn in Falls City, Washington. Hey, Glenn, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, well, of course, none of us can wrap our heads around conspiracy theorists and QAnons, but for example, I was in a conversation, air quotes there, and since I called Pizzagate a farce, this person said, well, you might actually be a pedophile yourself. So, like, of course that's crazy, but
God.
What is the psychology of their, or maybe not the psychology, but their rhetorical tactics? And, it seems like they can all be distilled down to things that I can look into just academically. And if you have any sort of reading or anything you'd recommend just to try to understand the wackiness around us.
There have been over the years, over the last 100 years, numerous thoughtful studies into the, why conspiracy theories spread and how they spread, and the both sociological and psychological explanation is absolutely fascinating. We developed religion back in the day as a way to explain the inexplicable. Why did that lightning bolt hit Ralph last Thursday? Why did that flood wipe out our village? So we concluded there must be a reason to everything, right? There's, you can't just live your life assuming that just random crap happens all the time, because then life becomes very, very frightening. And so we try to understand, we try to explain things. And so we came up with the idea that, the gods are fighting with each other up in the sky, and Thor just threw a lightning bolt, and it accidentally hit Ralph. Or later on, that Jehovah or whatever is now pissed off at Ralph and threw a lightning bolt. As we got answers to those things better and better in the natural sciences, the power of religion to explain what's going on diminished. But one of the things that's really fascinating about this, Glenn, I've worked in the Middle East, and I've worked in back when I used to do international relief work, worked in a whole bunch of third world countries. And one of the things you find is that the more powerless people are, and the more marginalized they are, the more likely they cling to conspiracy theories or easily adopt conspiracy theories. And I think it's because they're trying to do the same thing that the conspiracy theories are filling the same role in their lives that religion did, which is to say, here's the explanation. If I can't figure out why I can't earn a living, why nobody will hire me, why the economy is going to hell, why it seems like things aren't working in my life, it's a lot easier to say, it must be because, the government has been taken over by fill in the blank, right? Jews, African Americans, Bilderbergers, aliens from the planet Xenu, than it is to dig deep and figure out that, this is really something that, billionaires like Charles Koch have been working on for 40 years or 60 years, the Reaganomics. I mean, rather than doing the hard work of actually understanding how, why things are and how they got this way, it's a lot easier to simply buy into a conspiracy theory. And so the people who are the least well-informed and the least likely to have any kind of scientific background or understanding or any training, frankly, in critical thinking or scientific process, the scientific systems, are the most likely to adopt conspiracy theories. And I think that really clearly defines the QAnon crowd. They're on the bottom of the pile economically, generally speaking. They're on the bottom of the pile in terms of, or at least they perceive themselves to be at the bottom of the pile. These are generally low-income white people who are trying to figure out, hey, I'm supposed to have white privilege. What happened? Why am I not a rich guy? Well, it's got to be that there's, this deep state that's preventing you from doing it, and they're collaborating with a bunch of, Democrats who like to drink the blood of children. I mean, that's where, that's how this stuff comes out. Glenn, thank you for a great question. And sadly, our job, if you want to blow up the conspiracy theories, we just need to explain why, to these QAnon folks, here's why your life sucks. It has to do with Reaganomics.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You don't need a deep state to explain this stuff. It's fairly straightforward and it's fairly easily documented. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gail in Antelope, California. Hey, Gail, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Oh, hey, I wanted to ask you if you think that what the postal inspector is doing could be considered actually tampering with the mail. I was just reading the definition of it, and it says that it's destroying, damage, or interfering with the mail. That's like you could charge it on a state level. And then it says mail fraud involves using the United States, the federal part, to carry out a scheme or plan to unlawfully obtain money or anything else of value. So, I mean, he's definitely, to me, interfering with the mail. Could they not charge him with, some kind of a crime?
Yes. Well, first of all, mail fraud is what Steve Bannon has been charged with, along with his buddies like Eric Prince. But although Eric Prince wasn't charged, but he's a director of that, this sham organization. But there is a specific law. There's number one, there's a law against tampering with the mail. There's also a law against delaying the mail. And I believe that Louis DeJoy could be charged under both those laws. The problem, with trying to do that is that the agency that would have to charge him, since these are federal crimes, would be the U.S. Department of Justice. The U.S. Department of Justice is run by Bill Barr. So, and I'm sure Bill Barr is very happy with what's going on. So, that's the problem. But,
well, it says here within the United States, tampering with the mail may be a crime under state laws. So I'm wondering if all of the states could just file charges.
If, you would have to look on a state-by-state basis and maybe speak with state AGs about, whether their state has a specific law against tampering with the mail, and if they do, then they would have some standing. That's great. I didn't know that, Gail. Gail, thank you. Mike in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So I'm diabetic, and I get my medications through the mail, and in the past, it's come, pretty quick. So this past Wednesday, I ordered my 90-day supply of medications and strips and Lancets and so forth. And my wife says I was only down to 1 day left on some of my meds. So my wife says the mail is going to really screw your delivery up. You should have gone off island and gone to pick it up in person. I said, well, we'll see. They came on Thursday.
Oh, that's good.
And it's happened in the past with other stuff my wife has sent from Seattle, has gotten down here in 2 days, but those were before this whole hubbub of DeJoy messing with the post office. But anyways, I was really worried, and I don't know. We have contracted mail delivery. We don't have actual employees delivering our mail. They are rural carriers, and they drive civilian vehicles, right-hand drive, and so forth. And I don't know. Maybe that has distribution centers out of DuPont. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I just wanted
I don't know either. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, good to hear that some folks are still getting their mail. Boy, is that music loud in my ear. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Diane in Tylertown, Mississippi. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Oh, fine. How are you, Tom? I'm so glad to talk to you. Okay, let's say I have a question. I'm a senior citizen. I'm old. And I've never seen anything like they're allowing Trump to have the Republican convention talking from the White House. I've never heard of that in my life. Why is that? That's not fair. Who do I complain to? What can we do about it?
You would need to call your federal representatives. In Mississippi, you have, well, in pretty much every state, you have one member of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. And their telephone number, you can reach all of them this way. This gets to the congressional switchboard, is 202-224-3121. My guess is, Diane, you're represented by Republicans in all 3 cases. And you need to ask them, what's the deal? I thought that I believe it's the Hatch Act says that you may not use federal property for political purposes. And so why is this president being allowed to break the law?
Right. Okay, well, I'm going to do that because I call them regular when I'm upset. But this is so wrong. From now on, the Democrats are going to be able to do the same thing. They act like they don't realize that.
I get it, Diane, and if you get a reasonable answer from any of your representatives, give me a call back, and I'd love to know about it. Diane, thank you so much for the call. Zenda in Bellingham, Washington, watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Zenda, what's up?
Hi, I've used the post office website for decades, and the non-flat rate prices are now, you can't even get to them. All it goes is to error code, so they're screwing around with the website now, too.
Really?
I love your show. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Zenda.
I wonder if that's the reason. For an hour.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because they're planning on changing the postal rates.
Could be.
So they're having to change the calculator on the back end.
Well, they've changed the rates before and haven't messed with that. So why would they mess with it now?
Well, okay,
so
that's a great question.
It's one of many other ways. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Zenda. Thanks for the heads up. I appreciate it. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I think we have a lot more local control than we realize. My mail was coming very, very late after 6:30, and now it's coming earlier. And what I did was pretty simple. I think the postal people want to do the right thing, and I went out one day at 6:30 and took a picture of the mail truck, and the postman came over and said, "Hey, what's up?" And I talked to him and asked who his boss was, and then got online and sent an email. They have a complaint form, got a prompt reply back with a contact person and a phone number, called them. They were very polite, kind of sheepish, and wanted to do the right thing, but kind of said, "Well, I don't know." And next day, mail came earlier.
Yeah. So no, I get it, Jonathan, but it's not your local mail carrier that is slowing down the mail. And showing up late in the day is not what people mean when they say the mail is coming late. They mean days.
Well, I don't mean that either. But what I mean is that I think there are other pressure points. And I think that we got to work from the grassroots level as well as from the congressional level.
Yeah, I get your understanding of it, but I would be reluctant to take on my local letter carrier. I think that this is something.
I wasn't taking him on. He was a very nice guy, and he was very friendly, and we were very friendly. But I think that you can't just sit on your.
But you issued a complaint, which is going to go on his personnel record.
No, it's not going to go on his personnel record. I mean, these guys want to do the right thing.
No, I agree with you on that, and saying, hey, I'd appreciate it if you could get the mail or something like that. Jonathan, I think we've talked this through. Thank you. Ernie in LaPorte, Indiana. Hey, Ernie, what's on your mind?
It seems like he was trying to make a point that only one side is worlds revolving around conspiracy theories when actually it goes on both sides.
Who's trying to make that point?
An earlier caller brought up the idea of conspiracy theories and how it's used to fill in gaps in information and in worldview.
Right.
And I would say that both teams, both red and blue team, have their own little pet.
So what conspiracy theory, Ernie, am I holding to that is nonsense? I can tell you one, and that is that pigeons are actually spies from the planet Xenu. But beyond that, I don't know of anything that I've ever said that falls into the category of this is just a conspiracy theory.
Well, I know you're trying to mock what I'm saying. If you actually think about it,
I'm asking you.
I'm talking about.
What are the left-wing conspiracy theories? Please name one.
You're on that side of the fence, and I'm pretty sure you have...
Please name one.
A worldview. No, I'm not going to do that, and you're not going to bully me into
All right.
getting into that conversation.
Thank you very much, Ernie. Good talking with you. Garrick in South Elgin, Illinois. Hey, Garrick, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Oh, boy. I get them all kinds. Anyway, you had Greg Palestine earlier in the week, and I heard him again last night on Rick Unger's show. And in particular, in regards to mail-in ballots, he was talking about the envelope being pre-postage paid. And he referred to, I believe he was talking about when it goes through the distribution centers, pre-postage paid envelopes take a different track than envelopes that have a stamp.
That have stamps on them. Yeah, because they've got a barcode on the bottom, and that senses the barcode and shoots it off to a separate machine. And so they never get postmarked. You're right.
Right. So my point is those people that are going to wait till the last minute to mail their stuff in, it would be in their best interest to throw a few stamps on that envelope, even though it's already paid.
Won't make any difference. It won't make any difference because the sorting. What you would, if you want to try and do that, what you have to do is take a black pen and ruin that barcode on the bottom of the envelope, and then put stamps on it. But no, that's just it's gonna create more work for the post office. It may slow down your mail, but that's the only way that I can think of because you've got to foil the machine, and the machine is reading the barcode. Thanks so much to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Dave Fulton, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, and Jabbermocky, who all work on this program. Thank you so much to our team, and thank you to you for being with us, for listening to us every week. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and get out there, get active, tag You're It, and get ready for the crazy. On Monday, the RNC begins. Have a great weekend. Be good to yourself and those around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag, you're it.